Representative Inez Cromwell, David Hyde, 64 Security Committee, Alternative Representative Don Nelson, Cody Griffin, DeKalb Auxiliary Party Forum Representative Terrell Short, Council Representative call for motion to adopt the agenda for this retreat. Moved by Dr. Marley, seconded by Mr. Campbell. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, call for the vote. All in favor, go by show of hands. It's unanimous. Agenda is adopted.
I have a question. Maybe Cindy can help us. Because it's a retreat and not a business meeting, from your experience, both the GSBA and as a school board member, are we sort of bound by saying the formality of a business meeting or? Okay.
Because it's a meeting.
Okay.
You can be a little informal, but you still need to follow the procedure.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Orson. At this time, I want to give personal thanks to Mr. Xander Bowie, Georgia School Boards Association, for facilitating this retreat for us. Ms. Bowie, we recognize that it is Saturday, and we know that you could have been doing some other things, but for the boys and girls of DeKalb County, you're with us today, and we want to thank you for that. Early on, I asked the board members to give their idea of what should be discussed today at the retreat. And in order to make sure no board member information was excluded, I wanted to make sure that we listed everything that the board members thought that they might want to consider. To that end, I sent you an email asking you to give a priority to each item on here this morning, so we make sure that we discuss those ways, so don't make sure we don't miss any of those if we run into the evening. We have to exclude some. So at this time, do you have any priorities to the exception of the way it's listed? Should anything from the bottom be pulled to the top from your perspective? Anyone?
So, I mean, I went through to this, and I think I sent you an email. I don't know if you got the email that I sent following this. I guess for the purposes of the retreat, as far as input into that part of the conversation, I thought it would be helpful to at least have some expectations set for the retreats and some goals around that in order to determine what the priorities might be. I mean, individually, I have listed these priorities, I've grouped them personally for myself in terms of short-term, mid-term, long-term priorities. But in terms of making sure that we collectively get out of the retreats what we want to get, I thought it might be best to understand or make the decision about the prioritization within the context of what our end goal is. So that's my end.
To that end, it might be a good idea, based on your suggestion, Mr. Mayfield, that we take each item here, and I'm sure each one buys some thought as to what they want gotten out of this retreat. So at this point, I'm going to just turn it over to Xander, from the standpoint of facilitating, what each board member would like to see, or the board members as a group would like to get out of this retreat. And I like to initiate that by saying, one thing I think we need to get out of this retreat is the role that we will play as a whole in ensuring that we adhere to advanced ed requirements in terms of they ask us to, one, develop a comprehensive plan to sustain the goal. And goal that I would like to see at some point. Now, it doesn't mean that we would have to develop that plan today, no, but that is one part of the plan I feel that must be or should be dealt with today to set a plan for how we will address that.
Yeah, one point I'd like to ask, if I could, before we sort of get into the specifics of the goals and priorities, whether or not, and I realize that we are essentially bound by the same procedures, but from a politics point of view, are there any, let me step back by saying, I'm expecting that there will probably be a lot of brainstorming types of conversations, if you will, as we go through this process. If there are some rules of engagement that we need to be concerned about before we go into this process.
I think that board members need to recognize that while this is an informal, more informal retreat, you still need to be recognized before you speak, because that helps to just keep down the clashes. You still need to be careful about addressing the chair rather than each other, so that there is not debate that becomes heated. Healthy debate is okay, but you don't want to get into back and forth between two board members. The other thing is that this is a hefty list. Now, I think that the board needs to determine just how long you plan to be in retreat, and then determine how many of these items you can actually deal with, depending on how much time is going to need to be given to each, because other than that, you've got 17 items listed, and in my mind, there is no way. So, I think that what you want to start out with is just figuring out how much time is intended for the retreat, and I'm asking the chair that.
Well, we initially wanted 9 to 4.
I thought 9 to 3.
9 to 3.
And that's for this particular,
For this particular.
like, there may be other add-on retreats.
Well,
No,
we're
that's
talking
just-
about today, and see, it's important, because we already started out with it's 4 or 3, so am I hearing 3 o'clock? I think that's just important for you.
3 o'clock.
Okay, great. And I saw 2 hands, so I'll start calling on the hands, and then I'm gonna turn it back over to the chairman, right? I think I saw your hand first.
Yes. Going back to what the chair said, I hope that we can trim this down a bit and kind of get some things that are coming down the road first, like system flexibility, accountability, things like that, and also maybe put together another day to meet the other half of this list.
Yeah, and my thinking is, my organization, my head was a little bit different than that, which is I broke it into sort of process issues, with my personal interest in making sure we had a retreat. We haven't had time as a group to sit down and process action items. And then there seems to be some items on here that are action items, all deserving of conversation. For example, the advanced ed report may be deserving of its own meeting, because there are action items listed. And there are a couple other examples. Dual accreditation has been an action item on our agenda. Now, all those things are important, but for me, at least at a personal level, I felt like we've all been thrown in this, and we've been running at 110 miles an hour, and we've never sat down and talked about how do we want to function as a group. And to me, that's a priority at this point, because that will then help us figure out how to do it.
How many can agree with that, or that assessment?
First priority.
First priority, so we deal with process. So the first thing we'll do is identify each one of these items related to process. And we will, yes,
We have one other hand.
I'm sorry. John.
Yep. So I added one thing to the list, and just in the spirit of that, the dual accreditation thing is just an update that I wanted, because I know we have to have that happen in March, which is next month, so there was just urgency to that. And so I'm happy to take that offline with the superintendent. We don't have to discuss that here, that's more action of a policy that we already passed. I just wanted to make sure we were far enough along the road. So if it's better to take that off with the superintendent, I'm happy to do that.
This
Well, the reason-
is fine. Is that okay? Is that
I have
right?
We'll sent it in, it's on. So, because the value is relative thing, and I want to make sure that we didn't leave out anything. So, anything else, Dr. Moore?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think it's important that process, how do we operate as a board, you know, how do we move forward as a board? Some of these other items that we have, need to look at, should they be for a board meeting, or a board meeting time, and not for a retreat? Because I look at a retreat, meaning that you move away from and into and engaging with the process of how we all come together and get the things done that we need to get done. So when I say accountability, you know, how are we accountable as a board and moving forward? But the other items that should not be here for a retreat, you know, I think that we need to look at those and put them somewhere else for another time.
At this point, I'm sorry, Dr. McClure, I was just going to say to that end, would it be okay for the rest of the board to identify those items that Dr. Moore was describing?
That sense. Just to add to what Dr. Moore said, in the future, could this also be, and I know this is a little bit of extra work, be something to put on Survey Monkey where we can actually rank them?
Yeah, I like that.
And then pass that back to you, and then have that as a put together, so we wouldn't have to go through the process of elimination today. Because everybody can send in all the agenda items they want to, we'll rank them as far as necessity, as far as what can wait, what can go to a board meeting, and then that agenda can be finalized.
Well, for the next retreat.
For the next retreat,
For the
yes.
next retreat.
Just one more thing, so before we move on. I just think it's being realistic of what we can really handle, and I think we have to do that. And we have to also remember it's our agenda. And even though we have personal, you know, input and personal things we'd like to see, I'd like for us to be a little more conscientious about what do we see as a whole for us as a board, and when we begin to come up with items instead of looking at specific personal things that we'd like to move forward. And I think that would help us to eliminate, because 17 items is a lot. I agree. And so I think that we might need to look at maybe 5 targeted things that we can really put the time into and really, really get into the meat of it and get it done at that time. And so we may just have to give up some things and be aware of that and not get caught into, I want to have it on because I want to have it on, and be able to say that what's for the betterment and the good of the entire board. So I'd like us to be able to think like that.
Well, this is a great opportunity that we can sit face to face and make those decisions rather than arbitrarily electronically making those decisions and excluding someone, and that's not the goal. So at this point, what we will do is identify and don't everybody wait again at the same time. We would identify those things that could be eliminated and put it in an action category to be considered at a later time. Mr. Orsi.
I would put in these categories, and this is not to diminish the importance. The GBSBA self-assessment, the advanced ed report, the report on district legal fees and current legal structure, that seems something that we may want to discuss in a public meeting anyway. The system flexibility updating, and there's also something that I think in a more public meeting.
What, now, you listen.
Ones that I think we might defer to.
Take off.
Take off.
Well,
Right.
can we take one at a time?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I think, so the first,
Speak up.
the GSBA self-assessment.
Can I ask a question about it? No, I didn't. I just want to be recognized.
All right, I actually just wanted to, because I think this could actually get you, why don't we, the Dr. Morley's suggestion, would it be more helpful to say, here are the top 5 things we want to address today? And then there are 12 that if we, you know, if we're done with that at 1 o'clock, then maybe we could knock out a couple more. But I think going through and taking stuff off is actually a longer process. We're going to have to take 12 off. Why don't we just take the 5 that we think are most important for today? And
Well-
maybe we can nominate some of those.
Well, then, as a.
Number one will be,
So I would think, at least for where I am, is communications
Yeah.
amongst ourselves.
communications.
Number
You know, wait,
7.
number 7.
And I think accountability, building on accountability.
Which one?
Number 14.
Number four.
What did that mean exactly?
I think, well, I don't know, put it in.
I did.
Okay.
Would you explain what you meant?
Yeah, and I'll have to step back a second. What I hope to have happen today is that we would, and I'll just read from my closing statement and make it succinct, begin to develop an effective, measurable governance plan to create a strong, high-performance board that leads the DeKalb County School District to become a fiscal management. Synchronize and leverage the collective board knowledge and skills to an effective, efficient decision-making body, meaning that the various disciplines that we bring to the table, that we apply those to give some rigor to what we are discussions, to make sure that we come out with a solid plan, to establish a solid foundation for future boards, and to add value to the superintendent's action plan. So, sort of with that as the context, I think I began the process with the law that says that if student performance and fiscal management is our primary responsibilities, that those items that will help us collectively define what the board sees with the body as a body as opposed to the individual paradigms, how we define those things. Because we will be, from my point of view, we will be making all of our decisions based on that baseline. So if academic performance, all of the elements that we define as measurables that we can agree that are objective measures, and they may not be numbers per se, they may be categorical for right now, but that if we could begin to define those things that have to do with student performance in terms of a baseline and fiscal management, that is the basis for building consensus around how we make decisions, is how I thought about the things that I put on the table. So from an accountability standpoint, it's a key component for both the academic performance and fiscal management, that we understand what we collectively agree needs to be assessed for academic performance, the financial information we collectively need to see to help manage the system's finances, as an example.
There's one thing that I do want to point out there. You'll have a strategic plan. And I don't know how far along you are on that strategic plan, but it seems to me that what's being presented here has to be aligned with that strategic plan rather than the board starting over. You need to have that strategic plan in front of you and then you align yourselves and tweak, et cetera. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I'm just saying that if that strategic plan is not here today, that might not be something that you could deal with today. But I hear what you're saying, it does make sense, but you don't want to reinvent the wheel when you've already got something in place.
Right, and I think most of the items that are in the, to that point, that are in the strategic plan, as best as I can tell right now, there are no measures in all of the elements that are related to academic performance and fiscal management. Those areas of assessment are in the strategic plan. So we wouldn't have to wait to see this, to have the strategic plan in front of us, because those areas are already captured. Those are all areas.
Can I respond to that, just simply because I think we need clarification? They're not all in place to the level that I think is necessary to achieve what you're asking for. To Ms. Bowie's point, the strategic planning processes happen now. And so we're at the place where the metrics and measures are being developed to be presented to the board now. That process has not been completed. Two things are happening. The strategic planning committee is working on that. A subset of that group is the flexibility advisory committee, which is looking at where we're going to be positioning the district from a system choice perspective. So that's also feeding into the development of those metrics for us to be able to measure.
And to that point, I would hope that this would be an opportunity for the board to provide input into that decision-making process for the strategic plan.
Can I speak?
Yeah.
Do you have
Yeah.
Do we have board members already on that strategic plan committee?
Correct. I serve on that committee.
Ms. Mayfield, I thought you were.
We haven't been engaged since we started.
Can I could,
Okay, okay, Dr. Martin.
yeah, when I looked at accountability, I did not look at it in that vein, and I agree with Ms. Bowie. A us a whole nother trajectory, and we should have that strategic plan. When you talk about assessment and all of that, making sure that everything runs parallel to what we're trying to do and what the superintendent is trying to do. I came from accountability as a board. What are our roles, rules, responsibility? If you're gonna look at number 7, communication, that would be in line, accountability as a board. What are our responsibilities? How should we behave and act as a board? And being accountable for our role as board members. But when you're looking at that, what you're saying, that's a whole nother level, and I agree that it should be a part of that strategic plan, and it should be in line with that, and we would have to have that. And my understanding is that there is a Karen, whoever is on the board, or on the committee that's dealing with that strategic plan. And I think until we can do that, we can't begin to look at all the assessments. A retreat should not be for a part of that. My understanding of a retreat is that we're looking at ourselves, we're looking at the superintendent, we're looking at our roles and how we're actually gonna govern. What do we need to do in order to be able to govern effectively?
So, on the academic, I'm just gonna use the academic assessment, because I've been a proponent of us having a more comprehensive view, but I think for us to have that conversation, the strategic plan's a part of it, because ultimately it is the board that has to decide on the strategic plan, whatever the committee does, and the people that make authority don't vote on it. But more importantly, I think it's very important for us to have that academic assessment meeting, but I think we need experts in the room with us to have that conversation. So I've been advocating for 8 months that we have a work session about what does academic success look like. But, you know, there's a strategic plan, but there's also the more general, what are the expectations of the public see about academic success? And we haven't had that conversation.
Let me ask the question.
Right.
Is the board prepared today to have that conversation? Do you have the information?
No, we don't have the experts.
So, can I ask this?
Right.
I think that it is a point wherein the board can make a decision. Is that something that you want to deal with
Right.
today? Because if not, that's something that can be pulled off the table, star it because it's something that you're all interested in, and you can piggyback it on the other things that are going on now.
Right. Or we have it we do it in a work session.
Whatever it's gonna be, it just sounds like that is not to be the discussion for today. Am I hearing correctly?
Yes.
Well, I think one exception to that, or one point to that, and that is because we haven't had the discussion, we cannot discuss the data points that are associated with it, the specifics. But I do think that we can have as a part of this meeting, a decision to make that a priority in terms of having it take place so that we can nail that down.
Right, but I think I saw the superintendent writing notes already, so.
The only caveat, academic performance in this economic environment. You can't set expectations and then not finance.
Right.
So whatever expectation you set, you are responsible for financing them. If you do not have the finance, I think it's disingenuous to set the expectation.
Yeah, and I have the resources.
You gotta have the resources. If you're not going to pay teachers a competitive salary, then expect things beyond the reach of where the resources are. It's a pipe dream, and it's just not gonna happen.
Hold on. I think that Mr. Coleman you had your hand up. Let's-
Yeah, I was gonna propose something, because it seems like we have some disagreement about what we're engaged in right now. I think the plan was to come with some preliminary metrics to the board in March, as I understood with the strategic plan.
Right.
What I suggested was, and other folks can do that you and I should meet with that group for at least a couple hours, I think, before that comes to the board. And so I've asked Mr. Thurman if that would be okay. We'll meet with Dr. Pringle and whoever else is appropriate, Karen, who else. Because I do think we should input to that before that meeting. And maybe with that in front of us, if we can get even a version of that over the next week or so, and then have time to process it and then meet with them. I don't know if that would kind of meet your concerns, because at least by March, we're ready to discuss it as a full board. Would that help?
And I guess I would add to one point, just in response to the superintendent's comment. I think that it's going to, from my point, that it's going to be important to set expectations, and that based on those expectations, however, we have to align the resources of the district and whatever we need to pursue to actually realize what we set as our expectations is the preferred path that I would take, rather than to limit what we aspire or pursue based on our current situation, because I think we can redirect resources based on whatever those priorities are. And we can pursue additional resources if there is a gap.
So is there consensus to move that forward? Do you have another comment? on
Yeah, I
that?
have a comment. I'm concerned. I have superintendent that we've charged, and we have a strategic planning committee that we take 2 board members and allow them to come in, and they begin to insert and drive that in a different manner. We have to be careful and cautious that we don't go down the same road that the previous board went down. So if we have a committee, that's why we have a committee, to come together along with the superintendent. We already have a board representative that we're supposed to trust that can do what we need to do. We've already given that charge to be able to do that. And so we look at what we get from that committee that we have actually given that charge, and from our board member who's on that committee, and then we take from that and then we move forward. But to have 2 board members to come in the midst of a committee actually doing their work and begin to drive it in a different direction, then that becomes more of a control factor. And then that, I think we have to be very careful, although we all want certain things to be done personally, but we have to be careful that it's not just I'm involving what I want to have and not looking at the totality of what's best for the board, the system, and altogether. Also, respecting that we do have a superintendent, because if we're going to micromanage, then we might as well go back to the way that we were before, and we're going to go back the way we have been for the past 10 years. So I just want to caution us to begin to look at that level of control and making sure that we're not micromanaging and that we're not trying to usurp the process because we have our own personal things that we would like to see involved in that process.
Yeah.
Mr. Cole?
Just a quick point of information. So the reason I suggested that, and I is because we're theoretically, we're both on the 3 members that were appointed to do the strategic plan. We just haven't been updated. And so it was technically Dr. Carter, Thad, and I who were all supposed to work on that. And we feel like we're out of the loop at this point. And so we wanted to catch up. I would certainly welcome anyone who wanted to get an update or have input into that process as well. I just wanted to make sure that we were fulfilling our obligations as they were laid out initially. That was why.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me just ask something. We have been talking about this one issue, actually about moving it to another place for quite some time. We're getting toward 10 o'clock, so I just want to make mind for that.
My point, which was earlier before, is it seems to me that, which would reconcile both Joyce's comment and the comment of John, is that we schedule this for a work session, so the whole board's engaged. It's an environment in which our experts are available, to the extent that we're not getting to the weeds, which I think I agree with you. But we can also begin to understand from our professional experts and your staff, and then give feedback about, because we are responsible for the overall mission of the organization as a Board of Education, and not as smaller groups. And I think that would then address your concern at an individual level, but it's well within our purview, and I think it's a healthy conversation we need to have, and to have it now, meaning short order, before we get into the budget season, which is your point about the ultimate alignment of resources to that vision. Not only is the strategic plan is important, but I also don't want to minimize it. We're in a day-to-day business also, right? Day-to-day business, we have to know how we're moving as an organization. The strategic plan gives us context, but the reality is we're going to be starting big budgets. Your staff is probably already busily working on that. To the extent we see something even before the strategic plan is complete that we may believe requires reprioritization, I think it's healthier to have it in an environment in which all groups are engaged.
So is there consensus to that being a work session item?
Strategic plan. Yeah.
So, well, the academic,
But the
Yes,
academic-
well, we're just asking for consensus, is there, and
Yeah.
consensus means even if I don't love it, I can live with it.
Right.
Right.
I mean, I still have to do.
Right, and I just wanted to just underscore the point that Dr. Morley raised in terms of putting our personal perspectives on the table as it relates to the decisions that we make. One of the reasons that I board the retreat was so that we could do that very thing, because I felt or believe, and still believe, that a lot of the decisions that we're making are coming from our individual paradigms, and that by creating a forum where we can actually put what we mean by academic performance or fiscal management, or whatever the items are that we're covering, that if they're all on the table, that we can all collectively agree what we as a body mean by that. Because as a body, as individual board members, we mean nothing with respect to the law. We have no authority. And so as a decision-making body, I think it's paramount for us to at least have some consensus around some fundamental things so that we all know what we're talking about when we say certain things. So that's the only reason that I'm putting those sort of personal perspectives on the table, so that all of us will, and we can come to a consensus of what the board believes it should be, as opposed to our individual points of view. So,
Okay, we've decided on one thing that will not be on the agenda.
I would like to suggest one thing, I think it must be on the agenda, and that is the board district line, because of the time, the timing of.
No more.
Sir,
I'll propose another, just because this is coming up. I
is
would like
everybody in
to.
agreement with the district line?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
The budget development process, just because we're gonna have to start that soon, I would like to kind of talk about what role we're gonna play and how we can have input into that, given that that's important, so the next couple of
Would
months.
you pair that with number 10 possibly?
Yeah, I'd be fine with that.
'Cause I think
I don't know what number 10 means exactly, but, yeah, it seems like.
So number 3, number 10 is a combo?
It seems to be what's financial budget is a big
Sure, need explanation on number 10?
who put it?
You added number 10?
I did. So I think the budget piece is.
You're talking about the board's role in that.
Right.
Okay, so that's number 3 and number 10 combined, kind of,
Sure.
is that correct?
Yep.
So we got that. So now we have
3. That's right.
okay.
My suggestion, and I think there's a few that can be grouped together, similar to 3 and 10, but, so back to communications, internally, externally, I'm just talking about the board right now, right? Expectations, for our communication within us, I think that could be paired with our, board office staffing, I think, would be how do we communicate with the administration, timelines for that.
So parents 7 and 8?
7 and 8, but then I also looked down and saw 11 and 13 kind of organizational culture performance. I put in board organization, right? That's just us.
Right.
So I'm thinking kind of 11, 12, 13 with 7 and 8 are all kind of just us. That's kind of defining who we are, how we operate, and what our expectations are. What's our culture?
Right.
So that's my 2 cents. That's like
So
5.
we can't do anything else?
Let's start with that and see where we get.
I think that's enough. I agree.
Yeah, because that's really 7 smashed into 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just was gonna say that I agree, because I think what we have to remember is that, the purpose of the retreat is to look at ourselves as we're looking at development and how we're gonna be much more effective in doing what we are assigned to do as servant leaders.
So you've had an elephant and you're taking at it a bite at a time, that's all you can do. If you can finish with those things, then you can come back to something else, but it sounds to me like this is a good place to start.
Could you
So-
repeat them for us?
What was that last group? That
11, 12, and 13.
7, 8, 11, 12, 13.
I mean, you might separate them into communications and
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah.
Can I ask, Mrs. Francois, did you capture everything that they?
I have it all. Let me just
Would you
recap.
run that back for us, please?
Number 1, board line, district lines.
Okay,
3 and 10 are combined, board's role in the budget development process, financial and asset management.
okay.
7, 8, 11, 12, and 13 are combined together. I'm a little fuzzy on 14. I'm not clear if it's supposed to stay or go.
Later, yeah.
Yeah, that was scratched.
And board members, remember that anytime you're meeting, if you've got somebody who is keeping a record, check back and forth with them to make sure, because sometimes there are misunderstandings, and you want to make sure that it's accurate. I didn't know where the word is.
Very minimal accreditation was pulled.
Sir?
And
I didn't hear what she said.
There's a dual accreditation was pulled,
Yes.
for offline discussion. So the only 2 that are still optional, are on the table for discussion, policy enhancement and system flexibility.
I think both of those are work sessions.
But everything else, other than what we discussed.
It's either work session or not today.
Yeah,
Just not today.
not today,
Right.
just not today.
Would it be helpful if I went and retype this just with the ones for today?
I
That'd be
think
awesome.
that's okay.
Great.
I think we'll.
Yeah.
Think you're okay?
I'm all right.
We need you in the room because there's gonna be something.
To the women.
I saw you first.
And just, I think, to Dr. Irwin's earlier communication the prioritization survey monkey kind of deal. I think it would have saved us an hour.
Yes.
If we had survey monkey kind of, and gotten clarity, and that's part of our communication with each other and how we want to operate.
But the-
Dr. Excuse me, I just want to say, Dr. Irwin just wants to use Survey Monkey.
Dr. Cobb brought it up. I think we need
I think it is one of our favorites.
Okay.
regarding the survey monkey, but this situation, I think if we had done this earlier, we wouldn't have had the same impact we have today. Because to get face to face and discuss it, and we talked about, discussed this, yeah, but to get on the email and email what we have been talking on today, we would still be emailing each other. But now that we know where we're going and the direction that we're moving, then I can agree with you.
Prospectively, right?
Yes.
And from Dr. Johnson and I's personal experience, I'll give a golf analogy. I was very respectful to Dr. Johnson the first time I teed it up with him. But after that first few holes, we got to know each other a lot better, and it was kind of just second nature. And so I see us as a board, once we're going through this process, that we would develop our relationships together and enhance our relationship. So with that being said,
And one thing I do want to point out is that, now, I'm terrible with names, so I like the
That's
fact
why we
that
try to
you
put
put
them in
that
there.
here, because I'm terrible and I know I'm But I do want to point out that Jim here has been helpful in pointing out whose turn is next. We need to get to a place where you don't keep your hand up while someone else is talking, because it sends a message that you're not trying to send. And it says what you're saying is not important, and I got something that's more important. Now, he writes it down as soon as he sees it.
But that's his job.
And that's
He does it
fine.
all the time.
What I'm saying is, since he's doing that, you kind of make that eye contact to see that he's gotten you, and then put your hand down, because it's distracting. Is that okay that I say that?
Oh, absolutely.
that's part of our communication,
We're learning.
right?
Great. Okay.
With that being said, communication, if I give you the little, is that okay?
Yeah.
I'll give you the correct thing.
Facebook.
And we've also got to make sure that when you do that, that the rest of us adhere to it, because we've been
Absolutely.
identified.
Absolutely. Okay, Dr. Johnson, go ahead.
The first item, board district lines. Yes, sir.
And maybe not today, but the administration needs some clarification with the board as it relates to the strategic planning process. Because earlier, I think at a board meeting, it came up that Mr. Coleman today asked for a workshop to be updated. Mr. Mayfield spoke to it. In all fairness, Dr. Carter, she is the board representative. And so our understanding was that the board would communicate through Dr. Carter progress on the strategic planning process. But if there's a different process, then we need to be made aware of it, and because it's come up before. And if we need to do something different, but is that true or am I?
We established, and Dr. Johnson asked us to establish, do you mind if we go up
No,
to
no,
ask? Okay.
it's important, because that is communication.
Right.
Yeah.
Dr. Johnson asked us to establish an ad hoc committee to work with the administration to develop the planning process for the strategic plan. And that was Mr. Coleman, Mr. Mayfield, and myself, which we did. We worked with staff. They presented from GSBA and a few others, and then went out and did the RFP, came back, GSBA and GLSSI were the best responsible respondent parties. We then went through all of their documents. We all got that information, met by phone and in face time. And then the strategic planning committee was appointed. And I was appointed from this body to represent them on that committee. But the committee meetings are all open, all posted in our weekly calendars that Margaret provides, so any board member could attend any of those meetings. But to date, I have not had any requests from any fellow board member for clarity about process, progress, or concerns. So if we do need, if I'm hearing that there's a process desired, then we need that, or we just need a workshop so that we understand
where we are today in moving toward the metrics, which I heard was the bigger concern 2 months ago when they presented, and my colleagues were a little confused about what was going on. So,
That would help us, just to clarify what the process is and organizational structure. Because we are proceeding based on what you all decided the process should be and who the contact person should be. And if that is going to change, then just update the administration and Dr. Carter, just in order to be fair to her, because it suggests that somehow she's not communicating. I don't think she's working very hard. So it's just not fair to her in that context, to me.
So Dr. Carter has outlined for the board what her understanding is and has been of the process. And if there is a need to discuss that further, we can do that, or can we just accept what she has said since it seems to have been derived from the board?
I would request a workshop for at least 2 of us, or open to the rest of the board. I don't care, but I would like a 2-hour workshop with the people designing this prior to bringing it to the board.
In fact, it's going to take maybe to add to that, or as an alternative, at the very least, the 4 of us get together and talk about what the board's relationship ought to be with the committee, and then perhaps a subsequent.
Okay, now what I'm hearing is that the board made a decision. The board made a decision that Dr. Carter is now following. If that needs to be changed, it should not be a segment of the board. So that can be for another session. It cannot be today. We cannot repeat that anymore. But it's obvious there is confusion about that information. So can you put that on an agenda to be discussed so you all can work that out?
Right.
That has to be a board decision.
Right.
And I did see your hand.
Oh, I think Ms. Mayfield.
No, that was on mine.
Yeah.
We do need to coalesce around that issue.
that goes back to what I said earlier. That was my understanding, and I think that as a board, when we start looking at communications, we have to be very careful because we have allowed ourselves on many occasions to sort of get bogged down and logged down with these type of procedures. We make a decision. If we're going to lead children and lead the system, how do we keep going to change what we agreed? I trust Dr. Carter because we agreed that that would be the process, that she would come back and report. I don't need a 2-hour workshop on whatever's coming down, and I think that we have to be careful to keep going back and undermining our own decisions. So that doesn't look that great as leaders, and we're trying to govern the system. And also it goes back to undermining our superintendent. Again, back to what I originally said, we have to be careful because then we come back to the micromanaging. If we have a committee, that's why we have a committee. That's why we appointed and we went through that process so they would do the work and Dr. Carter would be our representative and that we trust her enough, and it goes back to trusting the superintendent enough, trusting the process enough that we put in place. And if there are a couple of people who need to have that, I think that I would like to suggest you take it upon your own to do that, but I would not want to see a mandate and come in again for 2 hours and belabor the whole process because 2 other people want to be able to have it. And I don't have a problem with that. I personally would not want to be a part of that. I would like to have Dr. Carter to take on her role and we stand by what we said we were going to do.
Let me suggest something, and that is that we go back through the minutes and find the minutes where that discussion took place and see what that decision was. It probably has been some time ago, and if you're aging like I am, I don't always remember what we talked about. You pull those minutes and distribute them among board members so that you can see what the discussion was, then you might make some decision as to whether or not you want to change, because if you want to change, that's appropriate. But you need to look at what it was that you decided first, and I think it was concerned.
And then Dr.
So, a couple things on that. That's relevant, except that we also be mindful of our own processes, which is we appointed a strategic planning committee, but by our own policy, those committees expire after 60 days. That was actually part of our redesign of our committee structure, so that we don't have standing committees, and our committees expire after 60 days. So even if at the time, we established a committee that may no longer exist by virtue of our own policy, that was
And they did the work.
Right,
The work
right,
was done.
right. Work's done.
Yeah.
And so that was, and the purpose was in order not to have standing committees, and that was actually a direct recommendation of SACS. And so I would favor a work session. I think because the strategic plan, in my view, ultimately belongs to the board. top of the governance pyramid, that having a check-in for where we are in the process, I am always concerned that we do delegate through a group the development of a strategic plan, but the problem is I think often boards that come at the tail end, and their lack of being connected to the process or more engaged in the process leaves the risk that the strategic plan and the board don't actually line up in the labor process. I don't think it will be a work session for us to start rewriting it, but I think it's important for us to know where it's going, because if collectively as a group, we see something that doesn't really fit in with our notion better now than when the plan gets developed to us and we have to vote on it, because that's going to be, could be a vertical.
Yeah, I just have a couple comments. The first one, those that are interested in having a work session probably need to get with Dr. Carter and set up a date, because you guys kind of belabored the point. I would like to second say, can we please move on?
Big flag stickers. Thank you, Dr. Irwin.
With facilitator's permission, I will move on.
Mr. Superintendent, did you?
No, actually, Dr. Irvin expressed my sentiment. This is exactly what I was going
Let's
to
do it.
Thank you.
My presentation, I would.
Well, the first one, I'm not in a position to tell y'all to move on.